fishermen sleeping, and falling overboard and then drowning and dying. And then 14% of these fatalities resulted from injuries sustained on board, like, for example, for vessels that have filleting machines, someone gets their hand cut, or someone is beaten unconscious by, for example, a moving winch, and so on and so forth. And so 9% of these fatalities occurred onshore. So not necessarily during a fishing process, but onshore injuries. And this is very significant, because 878 commercial fishermen over a period of 19 years is a lot, especially for a country that is developed and where a lot of these measures are in place to prevent such tragedies. There are very few statistics and trends in inland fisheries. A lot of the statistics and trends about occupational safety and health exist in the marine fisheries of the developed world. But for inland fisheries, like lakes and rivers, such statistics don't exist. Also, statistics from the aquaculture industry is limited at a global level, and there are very big data gaps, especially on work-related diseases, regulatory standards, well, for international standards, but also country-to-country standards, then industry practices and occupational safety and health management systems. So let's come back home. Let's look at the case of Uganda. So Uganda as a country is actually endowed with enormous freshwater resources, and about 20% of the country's landmass, which is about 42,000 square kilometers, is made up of freshwater. So the fisheries and aquaculture industry contributes to around 3% of the gross domestic product. The current capture production is about 570,000 metric tons, majorly from the 5 lakes that you can see on your map, which is Victoria, Albert, Kyoga, Edward. So Albert, Kyoga, Victoria, Edward, and George, and about 160 minor lakes. Lake Victoria alone provides about 55% of this total production. So this makes Uganda the 5th largest inland capture producer in the world, and in the world, and the first in Africa. The current aquaculture production stands at 120,000 metric tons, which makes Uganda the 4th biggest aquaculture producer in Africa, behind Ghana, Egypt, and Nigeria. So in terms of the fisheries, 3 main species are exploited. That is the tilapia, the one you see in the middle, the Nile perch, and then the silver cyprinid, commonly known as the mukene. So in terms of biomass from the fisheries industry, mukene, or the silver cyprinid, contributes about 60% biomass, but in terms of value, especially export value, the Nile perch accounts for about 80%. For aquaculture, tilapia and catfish are the biggest species, with tilapia now at 60% production, mainly from cages, and catfish about 40%, and mainly from tanks and ponds. So let's look at the fish value chain. So every fish that produced in Uganda passes through one of these nodes in what we call the fish value chain. Okay, so the first node is equipment supply, that involves, equipment suppliers, people that supply fishing gear, people that hire labor, people that supply fingerlings to farmers to stock, and so on and so forth. But probably the most important is the production node in the value chain, that involves extraction of fish from the lake or river, which is capture production, or harvesting of fish for people that are involved in fish farming. So after the fish has been produced, it goes through 2 kinds of processing. The artisanal processing, which focuses mainly on preservation to minimize waste because of the fact that fish is a very perishable product. And The artisanal processing techniques include salting, sun drying, and sometimes frying. So the other fish also goes through factory processing, especially fish that is destined for export. And it involves, for example, cutting the fish into fillets, packaging them, cleaning them, and preserving them, mainly for the export market. Then we have the transportation node that involves transportation of fish from the landing site to the processing plants, but also from the artisanal fisheries and also from the processing plants after the fish has been processed to markets that can be local, regional, or international. So in terms of fisheries and aquaculture employment in Uganda, the export revenue that the fisheries and aquaculture industry brings in is around $235 million, and it's the highest value export after gold and coffee. It employs over 7 million Ugandans at the different nodes. And it's important to note that about 80% of the labor in the post-harvest fisheries and aquaculture industry is actually women. So in the pictures on the upper right, you can see two men preparing the net to go and fish. But below you can see a woman trying to dry silver cyprinid at a landing site. And then you can also see women in a fish processing plant, filleting for export. And also on the left, you can see a gentleman feeding fish in a cage. So that is aquaculture. So these are the different kind of employment that is involved in the fisheries and aquaculture industry. So a little bit more on the export. Currently, we have 11 state-of-the-art processing facilities, and the capital that has been invested is around $300 million. Like I've said, it has a multiplier effect, employing 7 million Ugandans, directly or indirectly. But in terms of the processing for fish for export, the whole processing for fish for export industry employs about 32,000 workers. And I've also talked about the foreign exchange that it brings in, and about 29,000 metric tons of fish are annually exported to international markets. So a lot of our fish from Uganda goes to the European Union, 66% of it. About 28% goes to Asia. 3.2% comes here to the Americas, especially here in the United States. And then about 2% is exported to the regional markets in COMESA. So you can clearly see that the fisheries and aquaculture industry is really big and is a very important factor in the economy of our country. What's the state of occupational safety and health in the fisheries and aquaculture industry in Uganda? Well, at the moment, all the efforts are on the safety and quality of fish, especially for export, but not on the occupational safety and health of the workers in the industry. So minimal data exists to that extent. So the first indication that we've had about occupational safety and health, especially for fishermen in Uganda, came from an LVFO report that indicated that 5,000 people drowned in Lake Victoria in 2020 in the whole lake. So these statistics were from Kenya and Tanzania, but specifically for Uganda, the report says that 788 fishermen drowned in Lake Victoria because of boats capsizing during a fishing trip. Now, if these numbers are true, this is a definite cause for alarm for everyone that is involved in the industry. There is no data from the aquaculture sector, at least official data from the aquaculture sector, especially from cage fish farms. So the Fisheries and Aquaculture Act 2022, which is the guiding policy document on which the fisheries and aquaculture industry is based, does not have any regulations related to occupational safety and health that are meant to guide the industry. And it's therefore up to individual companies or businesses to include occupational safety and health in their operational guidelines. And as you know, the fact that 80% of our businesses are informal means that a lot of these operational guidelines are not included in the day-to-day activities of these businesses. Generally, there is also poor enforcement of labor regulations, often tainted with corruption and non-compliance at all levels. So let's look briefly at occupational safety and health and the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, the Sustainable Development Goals, as many of you know, are the 17 goals that have been set up by the United Nations in a bid to improve the standard of living of people around the world. Occupational safety and health is very central for especially for the developing countries to be able to hit the Sustainable Development Goals. So 3 goals have been highlighted by the International Labour Organization that relates directly to occupational safety and health. Goal number 3, which is good health, aims to substantially reduce the number of deaths and illnesses from hazardous chemicals, from air, water, and soil pollution. And as we are going to see, the fisheries and aquaculture industry exposes its workers to a number of chemicals, to a number of pollutants. The second SDG is decent work and economic growth, and this aims to protect labor rights and promote a safe and secure working environment for all workers, but especially migrant workers, and particularly women migrants and those in precarious employment, like the fisheries and aquaculture sector. The third important sustainable development goal that is directly related to occupational safety and health is peace and justice, that aims to develop effective, accountable, and transparent institutions at all levels of governance. And this involves implementing International Labour Organization guidelines by responsible institutions in member countries. So let's then dive deep into the occupation hazards in the fisheries and aquaculture. So this is going to be broken into the capture fisheries and the aquaculture sector. So for capture fisheries, the physical hazards that exist include boats sinking or capsizing, which causes drowning, and this is the leading contributor to fatalities. As you can see, these are some of the things that appear in the news regularly, where boats are capsized on a regular basis, not only on Lake Victoria, but on all the other major lakes in the country. Slips and falls overboard due to fishermen working alone on the boat can lead to injury if the fisherman, for example, is saved, and death if the fisherman is not saved. So this is also something that is very important to note, that someone can slip and then fall, in the water, and they disappear. And then also working with gear and pulling in lines over long hours exposes fishermen to ergonomic hazards. Ergonomic hazards cause issues like sprains, chronic and acute back pains, muscle strains and tears, lacerations, and also fractures, which cause long-term impacts on the health of the people that are involved. Another new phenomena, which is not very new, but something that has come to light in the recent years, are the floating islands, or the SADs. So the floating islands are mainly on the swampy lakes, especially Lake Wamala and Lake Kyoga, and they have led to death of fishermen because they lock them inside the water body and then they die of hunger. So there's been a case of 2 fishermen recently that died on Lake Wamala due to the fact that the SAD cut them off and they couldn't land their boat, and they were stranded for weeks and weeks, and they had to die of hunger. So this is something to think about, and this is something that is emerging. And so this is something that the people that are involved, especially in the management of the fisheries, need to take care of. Other physical hazards include exposure to hot weather conditions, especially the sun, that can cause skin burns, heat strokes, and then cancer, eventually to the fishermen, but also cold weather shock, especially for people that fish at night. Most of the silverfish fishing actually happens at night. And so this causes respiratory problems and other health issues, such as hypothermia to the fishermen. Biological hazards include exposure to parasites and pathogenic infections in the water. As you can see in the picture on your bottom right, you have a group of fishermen that are not putting on any protective gear, and they are just standing in water. And this exposes them to all sorts of parasites and infections in that water. Also, attack by wild animals, for example, crocodiles, are causing injury and death. I'm sure you've heard of instances in the news where crocodiles attack fishermen and kill them on a regular basis. Psychosocial hazards exist in the industry, and these are from result from prolonged work, which causes sleep deprivation, and also the load on their mental capacities might lead to drug abuse and alcoholism by fishermen as a way of coping. So what are the occupation hazards in the fish processing node of the value chain? So the physical hazards include cuts and scrapes for people, for example, that are working in processing plants, cuts and scrapes resulting from use of knives and other sharp tools, which causes pain and infections like tetanus if not treated. Then, of course, you have falls caused by slippery floors within the processing plants, and also stairs, especially when carrying heavy loads and materials. And these leads to sprains and fractures. Then stings from fish spines from handling fish without the use of appropriate safety devices. And these stings can be poisonous, causing severe pains and infections, just like the cuts and scrapes. And then redness of the eyes, basically due to contact with smoke. So this is from the artisanal processing. So this, when women are processing their fish, they're using these smoking kilns, and because they don't wear protective, glasses and all this, it leads to contact of this smoke with their eyes, and this leads to redness of the eyes. And this has long-term impacts like itching, mucus discharge, pain, and even blurred vision. Other physical hazards include the Whitlow disease, which is a bacterial or fungal infection that basically occurs by dipping hands in cold water for a long period of time, especially people that work in the fish processing, because fish is a very perishable product. A lot of the handling takes place in very low conditions or very low temperature conditions. And this Whitlow disease causes scarring, nail damage, and numbness of the fingers, but also skin hypersensitivity. Headaches, fatigue, heat strokes, and general body weaknesses as a consequence of long periods under the sun, and also long periods under cold weather, especially in the fish processing plants. Then fish sorting activities generate ergonomic hazards. We've seen ergonomic hazards in the fisheries, but they also exist in the capture fisheries, but they also exist in the processing. And these are due to high conveyor belt speed. So people standing on a conveyor belt the whole day, and it's moving at a very high speed, which causes repetitive work, and also prolonged standing because you're basically standing on the conveyor belt, and also sometimes abnormal postures. And this leads to all the impacts that ergonomic hazards does in the capture fisheries. Then noise and vibration, especially in fish processing factories from machinery, can cause long-term, temporary, or permanent hearing impairments. And that's why it's important to always have equipment that cancels noise in these processing plants. Chemical hazards in fish processing include, of course, exposure to smoke particles, especially the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which have been found not only to cause asthma, but also to cause lung cancer. And also some of the disinfectants used by fish processors to clean equipment and holding units like formalin and gamine are harmful because they are carcinogenic and they have been found to cause cancer in the long run. Again, psychosocial hazards also exist, and this basically originates from prolonged and extra hours of work and mental demand, which puts workers at a greater risk for depression, anxiety, stress, panic, shame, post-traumatic stress, and all these things. And as you know, mental health is now something that is very big. I mean, there is no workforce if they're not in the right state of mind. So it is important for workers to be in the right state of mind in the fisheries and aquaculture industry. Let's look at aquaculture. The physical hazards in aquaculture include injuries caused by some fish species, like the catfish and the tilapia, that have fins that prick workers if not well handled, and then cuts that result from sharp objects such as knives, which cause again injuries. Then machines like feed mill exposes workers to excessive noise, which results in loss of hearing and mental fatigue. So in the processing plants, you have machines, like filleting machines that make a lot of noise. But in aquaculture, where you're manufacturing fish feed, you have these machines that expose workers to excessive noise that really have the same impacts. Also, feed mill workers are prone to asthma caused by dust that comes from a mixture of, so during the manufacture of feed, you have a mixture of all these different raw materials and ingredients. And if workers are not protected, for example, with gloves or with masks, they're going to be exposed to the dust, that washes off these raw materials, and this will cause asthma and also other respiratory complications. Also, there are similar hazards from the capture fisheries, especially for people that work on fish cages. So you have boats sinking, you have slips and falls from boats, and then also you have working with gears and also unsafe equipment and also exposure to hot weather. So these are similar hazards from the capture fisheries, but they also exist in the aquaculture, especially for people that have big farms and have components of cage fish farming. So chemical hazards in the aquaculture industry include exposure to inorganic fertilizers, pesticides, hormones, and formaldehyde. So let me talk a little bit more about these hormones. So a lot of the fish that is farmed in Uganda at a commercial level is reversed sexually. And so they use a hormone known as 17-alpha methyltestosterone. Now, this hormone has been, research has shown that this hormone is dangerous, especially for women to handle. And even for men, it has to be handled following strict protocol. So all facilities that handle this hormone have to make sure that all these protocols are in place so that you don't have negative impact of this hormone on human beings. The biological hazards, you have exposure to parasites, just like in the fisheries industry. For example, if you have access to ponds and you're not putting on protective gears, like waders, you're going to expose yourself to all kinds of parasites and disease-causing agents. But also some fish farms, have been victims of attack by wild animals, especially crocodiles for cage farmers, but also otters and monitor lizards for pond workers, which causes injury and death. So let's look at the recommended occupational safety and health practices in the industry. So for aquaculture, all life jackets and other PFDs or personal flotation devices should be available to all cage workers. So protective gloves, glasses, shoes, waders, hats, masks, and other personal protective equipment should always be worn at all times during implementation of that specific activity. Swimming and scuba diving training should be a must for all farm workers and staff. And then strictly following instructions when handling chemicals and the sex reversal hormones. First aid equipment should be available and workers trained on how to use it. And then a full-time occupational safety and health personnel, especially on big farms and facilities, to regularly train staff and workers on the different protocols. Then something that is very important that is not usually done, especially in the industry, is insurance schemes for workers to compensate them in case of death and permanent incapacitation from work in the industry. And then flexible working hours, people should be given flexible working hours, including mandatory leave to prevent burnout and also to promote a good work-life balance. On the side of the capture fisheries, just as in aquaculture, there should be mandatory wearing of life jackets and other personal flotation devices. First aid kits should exist on all boats, and all boats should be inspected for stability on water. Mandatory safety and survival training. No overloading of boat, especially with catch. Accurate weather forecast predictions, and most of this is actually from the local knowledge. So this is important because then fishermen will know when and not when to go on water, depending on the weather. And also adherence to law enforcement by fishermen. A lot of fishermen have lost their lives because when they're approached by law enforcement on water, especially when they have been doing something illegal, they just jump into the water and drown. So there has to be adherence by the fishermen to law enforcement, but also law enforcement should be trained on how to handle situations that does not lead to a fisherman dying. So for the processing industry, there should be provision of all the necessary personal protective equipment and ensuring their proper use during work, training of workers and staff on aspects related to occupational safety and health, and also making safety a culture in these organizations. Insurance schemes, I've already mentioned that, and then also flexible working hours to prevent burnout, but also to promote a good work-life balance, and also using cancer-free smoking kilns by local processors. And NARO has developed what they call the FIK3, which is a cancer-free smoking kiln, and it already exists on the market. So people should be able to buy that and use that instead of using the local smoking kilns. So what can be done at a governance and advocacy level to enhance occupational safety and health in the industry? One is improving enforcement to boost compliance among fisherfolk and workers or owners of these businesses, but also enhancing a social dialogue. There has to be a mindset change at all levels of the sector. People should understand that occupational safety and health is important for the survival, for their own survival as human beings, but also for the survival of the industry. Then extending social protection to cover fishermen where it does not exist. Collecting and dissemination of statistics, data, and safety information is very important. At the moment, we don't have any data collection systems when it comes to occupational safety and health, and this has to be done in order for the government, but also for other stakeholders to know the trends in occupational safety and health in the industry. Promoting appropriate international standards that have been set by the International Labour Organization, of which Uganda is a signatory to a lot of these standards. And then consideration of gender roles is fundamental to achieve optimum occupational safety and health in the industry. So pre and post harvesting, this is very important to understand. There are areas in the value chain where men are the majority. There are areas in the value chain where women are the majority. And these areas have to be targeted differently in terms of occupational safety and health. Setting up a fish and aquaculture incident database is important to track work-related fatalities, and then educating the fisherfolk and farm workers on the Occupational Safety and Health Act of Uganda and its importance in protecting them. Also, strengthening institutions responsible for occupational safety and health and work compensation, like insurance companies, or a government-mandated insurance scheme, and then implementing and improving safety and health training by creating a certification program specific to fisheries and aquaculture with the different stakeholders, including SHAO and all the others. So the hands-on training of fishermen can involve, for example, how to use radio communication, how to use signal flares and firefighting, how to handle man overboard and recovery, how to do first aid and CPR, how to do flooding and damage control, and how to use life jackets and other personal protection equipment. So in conclusion, the fishing and aquaculture industry are very dangerous occupations. And so occupational safety and health is important to prevent injury in any form, cost in terms of lost work hours and medical expenses, but also possible lawsuits. Effective occupational safety and health is based on collective effort with all stakeholders involved in the industry. And as the aquaculture industry especially continues to expand due to an expanding human population that needs food and employment, occupational safety and health is important now more than ever to ensure a safe, health, and productive workforce. Can we beat the odds and achieve occupational safety and health? Personally, I think we can do that. Thank you very much for listening. This has been my short or long presentation, whichever way you think about it, and I can entertain any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Drake, for that elaborative slides. Members, if you have any questions, please, some have typed in the chat. You can as well type in your question in the chat or your comments or your submissions. Drake, let me first read for you some of the questions that have already been posted in the chat as more people are posting more questions. Hello, Drake, kindly elaborate for me how to deal with spillage on water by motorized boats during the fishing process. That is one of the questions in the chat.
Spillage, it says what? Spillage on what?
Spillage with, kindly elaborate for me how to deal with spillage on water by motorized boats during the fishing process.
So motorized, I think engines, okay. Okay, I can, I don't know how we can do this. Probably we can get a person or two to share their experience before I go into the questions, if there's still time, or we can just go into questions right away. I don't know.
I would suggest to first go with the questions.
Okay.
If we have some of the members that are in this sector, they can come on board and share their experiences.
Okay, so can I answer this, or I can take like 3 and then answer them at a go?
Let me see. There is a okay. Maybe you can answer one at a go as people are posting in the chat.
Okay, so the first one is like spillage from motorized. If I understood the question, someone is asking about how to deal with spillage from motorized engines. So a lot of these engines.
Drake, sorry to interrupt. Yeah. He's saying that he meant motorized boats.
Yeah, motorized boats, exactly. So spillage from motorized boats. So it means that oil spillage in this case, I would assume, and this actually just goes back to the quality of the engine that a fisherman buys. All these engines need, regular servicing, and when people don't service these engines, they start spilling out the oils in the water, which can be detrimental, of course, for pollution and all that, but also for the fishermen, because if you're spilling, if your engines are spilling this oil, it can well, it's a long shot, but it can cause like fires on your boat. So it is important for you to service your engine regularly to prevent these oil spillages. I don't know if that's what they meant, like spillages from motorized engines on boats.
Charles? Okay, I hope he has been answered. Then the second question, what is the role / mandate of Federation of Fisheries Organization Uganda? I think that is FFOU and UFPEA in ensuring that fish producers implement OSH.
Okay, so that's a very good question. So those two that you've mentioned are actually stakeholders within the industry. So they're non-governmental organizations, but they work closely with all the other stakeholders in the industry, including the government. So those two are actually very vital in making sure that OSHA standards are implemented by the fishermen. So yes, they are very important, and their roles are very important. And I mean, I've worked with some of them for a long period of time, and part of the work that they do, for example, is they encourage fishermen, for example, to put on life jackets, and sometimes when they get funding, they buy life jackets for fishermen. So I think they've been doing a decent job, but of course, a lot of work needs to be done, especially to change the mindset of fishermen and make safety a culture. But yes, these two organizations are non-governmental, and they are also very important players in the industry, and they have been doing a bit of the work. So yes, they are mandated to do that kind of work.
Okay, another question. What sources of information are available to provide guidance on standards of motorized boats, diver requirements, and trainings for workers within the aquaculture industry?
Okay, this is also another good question. So so there are standards for motorized boats. I think the standard motorized boat is 28 feet, especially in the fisheries industry. In the aquaculture industry, I don't think there's a standard motorized boat, but for the fisheries industry, it is 28 feet. So all boats have to be 28 feet or longer. Now, there are no standards on diver requirements and trainings. So what happens is that individual fish farms do this for their workers, okay? And so because they do this for their workers, and because it is not something that is enforced by law, so there are no standards for that matter. But I know farms that are doing this, that are providing trainings and requirements for their workers. And so I think that they have developed their own standards. Okay, but of course, there are international standards by the International Labour Organization. So these standards can be got and customized for the case of Uganda. But for Uganda right now, there are no standards within the law for diver requirements and for training of workers on fish farms. But there are standards for the size of motorized boats in the fishing industry, which is 28 feet.
Okay, thank you so much, Drake. You mentioned, you talked about the Fisheries Act 2022.
Yeah.
And there's also the National Fisheries and Aquaculture Policy, which basically relies on fishing that takes place basically on Lake Victoria, then Lake Choga, then Albert. I'm looking at the small-scale farmer in Uganda who has no idea about this act, who has no idea about this policy, and some of because there is lack of management, okay, within most of these small scale farmers. They don't know about the regulations. There is lack of awareness, and all this being in play, they are exposed to the safety and health hazards that you talked about.
Yeah.
Yes. How do you think Uganda as a country, we can help that small scale farmer, because these people have employees as well. These people have employees as well, but they actually don't know that some of these laws exist. They don't know these acts are in place. They don't know these policies are in place. So how do you think these different stakeholders that we've been talking about, maybe Shao can as well come into play? How do you think we can help these small scale farmers?
Okay, so great question. Here's what I think. I think this has to start from top. My last slide, I mentioned that effective occupational safety and health is based on collective effort with all stakeholders that are involved in the industry. And it has to start on top. There has to be a recognition from the top management that this is something that is necessary, right? And after that recognition, then there has to be a lot of sensitization at all levels. And this is the only way this will reach a farmer, like you say, a small scale farmer who doesn't have any idea about policies, who doesn't have any idea about occupational safety and health. If there is sensitization from the government, but also from all the stakeholders involved. We've just talked about the stakeholders, the Fisheries Association of Uganda, the AFALUs of this world. Now you have SHAO. SHAO can be a very important stakeholder in the fisheries and aquaculture industry, especially in this occupation health space. So all this has to come together. There has to be will from the top, and then this will has to trickle down to all the different players, and then coupled with sensitization, and then you will have an industry that is involved in making sure that there's occupational safety and health. So this is something that can be, this is not something that can be achieved in one day or 1 month or even 1 year. This is something that is going to take time, and it's going to take a lot of effort, deliberate effort from everyone that is involved. So that is the long answer. The short answer is everyone has to be on board with occupational safety and health in the industry. Hello?
Oh, yes, there is another question here.
Yeah.
Has Makerere University integrated OSH into fisheries and aquaculture studies?
No.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Yes. Then Vincent is asking, how can farmers ensure electrical safety in aquaculture, especially now that farmers are adapting automated aquaculture systems? That is a question from Vincent, because I understand personally, I also know that the use of automated technology and robotics, especially in feeding and harvesting, is seen as a way to reduce risks in this sector. For example, most people have adopted to marine cage farming. You talked about reduction of the amount of time that the staff are exposed to these hazardous situations. But we know that even these methods pose risks to these staff if they are not well trained.
Yeah.
Yes, so this brings me back to Vincent's question, how farmers can ensure electrical safety in aquaculture, especially now that farmers are adapting automated aquaculture systems.
Yeah, so I think first of all, all electronic equipment, I think, come with manuals or guides, right, on how to be handled safely. Okay, and I think this is not unique to the aquaculture industry, and I'm sure people who manufacture those equipment know that they are going to be used in and around water. So it's up to the people that are using those kinds of equipment to make sure that they are using them in the safe way as regulated. A lot of times, and what causes a lot of problems is that people don't follow the safety regulations that come with these equipment. So they use them in the wrong way and they end up being electrocuted and die. So for me, the only way first to prevent this is to make sure that you're following the guidelines for that particular equipment, because every equipment comes with its own safety standards and protocol on how to be used. But also on the farms, the occupational safety and health manager or whoever is responsible for that should make sure that these equipment are used correctly in a correct way by the workers. A lot of these equipment are used, for example, by people that are illiterate, that have to be taught how to use, this machinery. And so there needs to be training, but also like regular refresher courses on how to use this equipment. We've had instances of people dying because they've been electrocuted, by these equipment. So for me, it's up to the person that is using this equipment to make sure that it's used in the correct way. If it has to be serviced after a particular period of time, please service it. If it needs some parts to be changed after a particular period of time, please do that. Make sure that you follow the safety guidelines for that particular equipment. That is the only way you can ensure your safety and the safety of that equipment.
Thank you so much, Drake. I see someone is raising their hand.
Okay.
Nachimba. Nachimba, you can unmute and I see your hand up. I guess she must have forgotten it up. Drake.
Yes.
When we talk about OSH regulations, you think some of these stakeholders that we talked about have maybe penalties that have been put in place or incentives for those companies that have improved performance when it comes to safety and health in this sector? Do you think some of these incentives can work for people to adapt these regulations and follow them so that we avoid the risks that come with these safety and health hazards in this sector?
Okay, yeah, so if you're asking if there's any kind of incentives right now in the industry for companies to improve, occupational safety and health, there's none that I know of at the moment, but that is a very good idea. I mean, one of the ways, if you want anything to be adopted by people, there are either two things, the stick and the carrot. You can either provide the carrot, which is, incentives, providing trainings, free trainings, and all the things to the industries, or the stick, which is basically to force people to do what you want them to do. Now, I've not seen any carrot being extended by anyone in the industry, but I've seen the stick being extended, especially by government. So there's been enforcement, especially in the fisheries. In the aquaculture, not so much, but in the fisheries, the law enforcers, especially the military, which is in charge of enforcing regulations on Lake Victoria and other lakes, have made sure that fishermen put on life jackets. It is mandatory. If you don't, you will be punished. So, but as a way of really encouraging people to take occupational safety and health more seriously, yes, a lot of incentives have to be made, especially from the different stakeholders, the government, or the NGOs that we've talked about, and even organizations like yours that can, for example, offer free trainings, to these fishermen as a way of improving occupational safety and health. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Keegan, I see your hand is up. You have 2 minutes. Keegan, you can unmute, please.
Hi everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Drake, for that presentation. Very important topic for fishers. And I just wanted to share some information on the safety aspect. And in Trinidad, under the FAO, we funded project. We had a training called Safety at Sea for Fishers. And basically what that was, we incorporated the basic training aspect on what persons will normally do to work offshore or on offshore platforms or vessels in the maritime industry. And we incorporated other aspects such as navigation, use of VHF radios, and some minor troubleshooting of outboard engines for the fishers. So we called it STCW, which is the standard for maritime, STCWF for fishers. So we know when fishers go, they face a lot of dangers out on the sea, bad weather, failed engines, and so forth. So this will decrease their risk while they go out at sea, and improve the resilience of the fishers and the chances of them returning back home. So it's just a program that was good in terms of mitigating the in terms of the health and safety of the fishers at sea. So I just wanted to share that, and thank you again, Dr. Drake, for that presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much, Keegan. Yeah, Keegan is calling in from Trinidad and Tobago. So it's good to see that, that there are people that are interested in this from as far as Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much, Keegan.
Okay, thank you so much. We are past time. Okoth, let me give Okoth just 1 minute. Asaf Okoth, you have 1 minute, you can unmute.
Probably they can write the questions in the chat. I think it is easier.
Yeah, I think Asaf is off. Drake, thank you so much for the training. Can you give us some of the last remarks for some of our colleagues that maybe in this industry, some of the key pointers that some of us should go home with?
Yeah, so the key pointers for the different stakeholders, number one, if you are a big fish farm or you are a boat owner, as an owner, you have to make sure that you put all the necessary requirements to have occupational safety and health on your facility. But as a worker as well, you need to make sure that you know your rights in terms of occupational safety and health, and you know the different procedures and protocols, because at the end of the day, the only person really responsible for your health is yourself and your safety at your workplace. I mean, the government can do so much, the owners can do so much, but it's also up to us. So this is something that people should know, that it's basically also up to them to make sure that they are safe. But the other thing I wanted to say is that this is something that is not going to take 1 day or 1 week. This is something that is going to take time. And as an industry, all the stakeholders, we need to be on board. We need to make a deliberate effort to make sure that there's occupational safety and health in the industry at all levels. It starts with you, it starts with me, it starts with all of us. And this is a very good first step what Shao is doing, just to throw out their information so that people are on board and they know what's going on, and then they can start from there. And so for me, what I can say is that, yes, we can beat the odds, and then we can have a very efficient occupational safety and health system in Uganda that benefits everyone that works within the fisheries and aquaculture industry. Thank you, Matt. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Drake. Those who attended the training, please, you can help us fill the form that has been shared in the chat. You can give us feedback about the training and tell us on how we should improve our next trainings. You can also follow us on our social media pages, LinkedIn, Twitter, our YouTube page. Yeah, I think that is all. This has been so elaborative. If anyone maybe has gotten a question as the time is ending, you can post it on any of our social media pages. We will get back to you answering some of those questions that you will post. Thank you so much for everyone who has attended. Thank you so much, Drake. We look forward to seeing you to some of our next trainings that will be organized.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, bye-bye.